It's Saturday afternoon at the shopping mall, Black Friday, holiday season, the kind of day when everyone seems to have decided to leave their house at exactly the same time. You're standing in the middle of the main corridor, surrounded by hundreds of people moving in every direction like a human river that never stops flowing. And you can't breathe. Not because there's no oxygen. There's plenty of air, but your chest feels tight anyway. Your heart is racing. Sweat starts forming on your palms, your forehead, the back of your neck. The noise, conversations overlapping, children crying, announcements on the speaker, music from store speakers. All of it crashes into your brain like static that won't stop. Someone bumps your shoulder without apologizing. A stranger stands too close in the checkout line, invading that invisible bubble you didn't know you needed so desperately. The fluorescent lights suddenly feel too bright. The smells, perfume, food court grease, the general odor of too many bodies in too small a space make your stomach turn. You want to run, actually run. Push through the crowd and escape to your car, to open space, to anywhere that isn't here. And you hate yourself a little for feeling this way because everyone else seems fine. They're shopping, laughing, living their lives while you're having what feels like a silent panic attack in the middle of Bath and Body Works. What's wrong with me, you think, gripping your shopping bag tighter? Why can't I just be normal? Here's what you need to understand. There is nothing wrong with you. Your brain isn't broken. You're not weak or antisocial or defective. What you're experiencing has a name, a cause, and a precise neurological explanation. And tonight, I'm going to show you exactly what's happening inside your head when you're surrounded by crowds, why some people thrive in chaos while you're drowning in it, and what this says about the way your unique brain is wired. Because once you understand the science, everything changes. The shame disappears. And the path to managing it becomes clear. Before we dive deep into applied psychology, subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're from. Act 1. The Overwhelmed Brain. 9 minutes. Michael Torres was 32 years old when he finally admitted to his therapist what he'd been hiding for years. He was a successful marketing executive, managed teams of 15 people, gave presentations to rooms full of clients. But put him in a crowded subway car during rush hour, and he would rather walk 5 miles in the rain than step inside. "I thought I was going crazy," Michael told me during our interview. "I could handle high-pressure meetings, difficult negotiations, public speaking. But a crowded grocery store on Sunday afternoon, I'd have a full meltdown. It made no sense." What Michael didn't know is that his reaction made perfect neurological sense. And it started with something called sensory processing sensitivity. Dr. Elaine Aron, psychologist and researcher who has spent over 25 years studying personality traits, identified that approximately 15 to 20% of the population has what she calls a highly sensitive nervous system. These aren't people who are emotionally fragile or overly dramatic. They're people whose brains literally process sensory information more deeply than the average person. When Michael walked into a crowded space, his brain didn't just register there are people here. It registered everything, every conversation happening within earshot, every movement in his peripheral vision, every smell, every sound, every subtle change in temperature and air pressure. His sensory cortex, the part of the brain that processes external stimuli, was working in overdrive. For most people, the brain has efficient filtering systems. The thalamus, acting like a neurological bouncer, decides what sensory information gets through to conscious awareness and what gets ignored. You don't consciously hear every car passing outside right now. You don't feel every thread of fabric touching your skin. Your brain filters it out as irrelevant noise. But in people like Michael, this filtering system is different. Not broken, different. More permeable, more sensitive. The thalamus lets more information through, which means more data flooding into conscious awareness, more stimuli demanding attention, more neural processing power being used every single second. Imagine your brain as a computer. Most people's computers have 10 programs running in the background. Michael's computer, 60 programs, all running simultaneously, all consuming processing power, all generating heat. And in a crowded mall on Black Friday, that number jumps to 200 programs. The result isn't just discomfort. It's system overload. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and rational decision-making, starts to struggle under the cognitive load. That's why simple decisions, which checkout line to choose, what brand of soap to buy, suddenly feel impossibly difficult when you're overstimulated. Michael's amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, was also involved. In evolutionary terms, large groups of humans meant potential danger. Crowds could turn into mobs. Strangers could be threats. Our ancestors who paid attention to these social dangers survived longer. But Michael's amygdala was particularly vigilant, hypervigilant actually. A 2019 study from the University of California used fMRI technology to scan the brains of people with high sensory sensitivity in various environments. When exposed to crowded, noisy spaces, their amygdalae showed significantly higher activation than control groups. The amygdala was sending constant threat signals, not because there was actual danger, but because the sheer amount of unpredictable stimuli, people moving erratically, sudden noises, unexpected touches, triggered the same neural pathways that would activate if Michael were in actual danger. His body responded accordingly. Cortisol, the stress hormone, flooded his system. His heart rate increased. His breathing became shallow. Blood flow redirected from his digestive system to his muscles, preparing for fight or flight. Evolutionarily appropriate responses, socially inconvenient in a Trader Joe's. The worst part, Michael explained, was that I couldn't explain it to people. When I'd suggest meeting at a quiet cafe instead of a busy restaurant, friends would call me antisocial. When I'd leave parties early, people thought I was rude. My ex-girlfriend accused me of not wanting to spend time with her family at holiday gatherings. But it wasn't about them. It was about the environment. Too many people, too much noise, too much everything. What Michael was experiencing is called crowd intolerance, and it exists on a spectrum. On one end, mild discomfort in packed spaces. On the other end, full agoraphobia, clinical fear of situations where escape might be difficult. But Michael wasn't agoraphobic. He didn't fear open spaces or public situations in general. He specifically struggled with density, with sensory chaos, with the unpredictable overlapping stimuli that crowded environments created. Dr. Jerome Kagan, developmental psychologist from Harvard, spent decades studying temperamental differences in children. He found that about 20% of infants showed what he called high reactive temperament. They cried more easily, startled at sudden stimuli, and showed elevated heart rates in novel situations. Follow-up studies tracked these children into adulthood. The majority grew up to be adults who preferred calm, predictable environments. Who felt drained by excessive social stimulation? Who needed significant alone time to recover from busy days? They weren't damaged. They were differently wired from birth. Their nervous systems processed the world at higher resolution, which brought both gifts and challenges. The gifts? High reactive individuals often showed enhanced creativity, deeper emotional intelligence, greater attention to detail, and heightened awareness of subtle environmental cues. They made excellent artists, therapists, researchers, and strategists. The challenges? Modern life is designed for low reactive nervous systems, open office plans, constant connectivity, urban density, 24-hour entertainment, the expectation of constant availability and social engagement. For people like Michael, existing in the modern world felt like being a person who needs 8 hours of sleep living in a society that glorifies functioning on 4. Michael's breaking point came at his company's annual conference. 3,000 employees packed into a convention center for 3 days of presentations, networking events, and social activities. By day 2, Michael was hiding in bathroom stalls just to escape the noise. By day 3, he called in sick and flew home early, convinced he was having some kind of breakdown. That's when he finally sought help. Not because he was weak, but because he was drowning and didn't understand why everyone else seemed to be swimming just fine. His therapist, Dr. Rebecca Kim, immediately recognized the signs of sensory processing sensitivity combined with what she called social energy depletion. She explained that Michael wasn't antisocial. He enjoyed people in small doses, meaningful conversations, genuine connections. He was what psychologists call a highly sensitive introvert. The introvert part meant social interaction, even positive social interaction, drained his energy rather than replenished it. He needed solitude to recharge the way extroverts needed socializing. The highly sensitive part meant his brain processed social and environmental information so deeply that he reached depletion much faster than average. Combine those traits, add crowded environments with their sensory chaos, and you get what Michael experienced: complete system overload. When she explained it that way, Michael said, "I actually cried, not from sadness, but relief. For the first time, someone was telling me I wasn't broken, that this was a real, measurable neurological difference, that it wasn't my fault." Understanding is powerful, but understanding alone doesn't make the crowds disappear. Michael still had to navigate a world full of them, and that required strategies based not on forcing himself to change, but on working with his brain's natural wiring. Act 2, The Science of Personal Space. 11 minutes, 3 weeks after starting therapy, Michael was standing in a crowded subway car, using techniques Dr. Kim had taught him. His heart was still racing, but this time he understood why. And understanding made it manageable. First, he focused on his breath. Deep, slow inhales through the nose, longer exhales through the mouth. This activated his parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system that counteracts the fight or flight response. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. Repeat. Second, he used what Dr. Kim called sensory anchoring. Instead of trying to process all the stimuli around him, he focused on one specific thing: the feeling of his feet on the ground, the texture of the pole he was holding. A single point of focus that gave his overwhelmed brain something concrete to grip. Third, he mentally created what psychologists call psychological boundaries. Even though strangers were physically close, he visualized an invisible bubble around his body. His space, his air. The proximity of others didn't mean they had access to his internal world. It wasn't perfect. He still preferred emptier cars. But he was functional, and functionality was victory. What Michael was learning connects to fascinating research about personal space and proxemics, the study of how humans use and perceive physical space around them. Anthropologist Edward T. Hall, in his groundbreaking 1966 book, The Hidden Dimension, identified that humans maintain different spatial zones depending on the relationship and context. Intimate distance, 0 to 18 inches, reserved for close relationships. Personal distance, 18 inches to 4 feet, for friends and casual acquaintances. Social distance, 4 to 12 feet, for impersonal business. Public distance, 12 feet and beyond. Crowded spaces violate these zones constantly. Strangers invade intimate and personal distance not because they want intimacy, but because physical constraints force proximity. And this violation, even when intellectually understood as unavoidable, triggers stress responses in the brain. A 2014 study from the California Institute of Technology found that the brain has specific neurons in the amygdala that respond to personal space violations. These neurons, called personal space neurons, fire when someone gets too close. The firing rate increases based on the proximity of the other person. In people with high sensory sensitivity, these neurons are more reactive. They fire earlier and more intensely. What feels like comfortable closeness to one person registers as invasion to another. Michael's brain wasn't being dramatic. It was responding appropriately to what it perceived as boundary violations. Understanding this helped him stop judging himself for his reactions. Dr. Kim introduced Michael to another crucial concept: the difference between solitude deprivation and social exhaustion. Modern culture treats introversion and crowd avoidance as problems to overcome. Put yourself out there. Get out of your comfort zone. You need to be more social. Well-meaning advice that fundamentally misunderstands how different nervous systems work. For people like Michael, solitude isn't avoidance. It's restoration. Being alone isn't lonely. It's necessary. The brain needs time without external stimuli to process, integrate, and recover from the constant input of social interaction. Dr. Matthew Lieberman, neuroscientist at UCLA specializing in social cognition, explains when introverts are in social situations, their brains show heightened activity in areas associated with intensive information processing. They're working harder to navigate the same social interactions that extroverts process more automatically. It's cognitively expensive, and that expense accumulates. Michael started tracking his social energy budget. He visualized it like a bank account. Wake up with 100 points. Small talk with colleagues at coffee machine, -5 points. Team meeting with 8 people, -15 points. Lunch in a noisy cafeteria, -20 points. Client presentation, -30 points. By noon, he'd be at 30 points. Functionally depleted, irritable, unable to focus. His brain desperately signaling, I need to stop processing social input. But if he built in recovery time, 20 minutes alone in his car, lunch eaten quietly in a park, 15 minutes of silence before the afternoon meeting, he could replenish enough to make it through the day. The key insight wasn't that Michael needed to become more social. It was that he needed to manage his energy expenditure based on his actual neurological wiring, not some culturally prescribed ideal of extroversion. 6 weeks into therapy, Dr. Kim suggested Michael try exposure therapy, but with a crucial twist. Instead of forcing himself into crowded situations to get over it, they would strategically practice in controlled doses while maintaining his coping strategies. They started small. Saturday morning at a grocery store right when it opened. Moderately busy, but not overwhelming. Michael went in with a specific list, headphones playing neutral music to reduce auditory overload, and a planned escape route if he needed it. First trip, 10 minutes, manageable discomfort. Heart rate elevated but controlled, successful completion. Second trip, the following week, 15 minutes, same store, slightly busier time. Still manageable. The goal wasn't desensitization, making Michael's brain stop responding to crowds. The goal was building confidence that he could handle temporary discomfort when necessary, and developing reliable tools to manage his nervous system's response. By week 12, Michael could handle necessary crowded situations, airports, work conferences, family gatherings, without complete meltdowns. He still didn't enjoy them, still needed recovery time afterward, still preferred quieter alternatives when possible. But he was no longer afraid of his own reactions, no longer convinced he was defective, and that psychological shift changed everything. Michael also learned to communicate his needs without shame. When planning social events with friends, he'd suggest alternatives. I'd love to hang out, but could we do dinner at a quiet place instead of that loud bar? Crowded spaces really drain me, and I want to actually be present with you guys. Most people, when given honest, shame-free explanation, were accommodating. The friends who weren't? Michael learned those relationships were based on him performing a version of himself that didn't actually exist. Real friendship, Michael discovered, means people accepting your neurological reality, not demanding you pretend to be wired differently. One particularly revelatory session happened when Dr. Kim introduced Michael to the concept of sensory diet, a term from occupational therapy describing the sensory input a person needs to stay regulated and focused. Just as bodies need certain nutritional intake, brains need certain sensory intake. Extroverts need high social stimulation. Introverts need low social stimulation and high solitude. High sensitivity individuals need calm environments, predictable routines, and restorative downtime. When Michael didn't get his sensory diet, his nervous system went into deficit, became dysregulated, led to the overwhelm and shutdowns he'd experienced for years. Armed with this knowledge, Michael restructured his life. He moved from a studio apartment in a busy downtown area to a one-bedroom in a quieter neighborhood. The rent was the same, but the constant ambient noise, sirens, traffic, neighbors through thin walls, had been draining him without conscious awareness. He changed his commute from crowded subway to driving during off-peak hours. Yes, it took longer. But he arrived at work calm instead of already depleted. He blocked off his calendar every day from noon to 12:30. Focus time. No meetings, no interruptions. 25 minutes alone in a conference room, just breathing and existing without input. His productivity actually increased. When his nervous system wasn't constantly in defense mode, his prefrontal cortex could do its job. Creative thinking, strategic planning, complex problem solving. The corporate world preaches collaboration, open offices, constant communication. For 75% of people, this works well enough. For the other 25%, like Michael, it's neurological warfare. Michael started advocating for himself at work, requested permission to work from home 2 days a week. When told the company valued face time and team culture, he came prepared with data. He showed research from 2018 published in the Journal of Environmental Psychology. Open office plans reduce productivity by 15% for tasks requiring concentration. He showed statistics on deep work versus shallow work, on the cognitive cost of interruptions, on individual differences in optimal work environments. He made a business case. I'm not asking to never collaborate. I'm asking to do my deep thinking work in an environment where my brain can actually function at full capacity. The result will be better work product, which benefits everyone. His manager, somewhat surprisingly, agreed to a trial period. The results spoke for themselves. On work-from-home days, Michael's output was measurably higher quality. He was less irritable in meetings, more creative in brainstorming sessions, more patient with colleagues, because he wasn't operating from a constant state of depletion. 9 months into his journey, Michael attended a friend's wedding. 200 guests. Reception in a loud venue with DJ, dance floor, packed tables. Exactly the kind of situation that would have destroyed him a year earlier. He implemented everything he'd learned. Arrived early, when the venue was emptier, to acclimate gradually. Chose a seat near the exit, giving himself psychological escape route. Took 3 separate breaks during the reception, stepping outside for 5 minutes of silence and cool air. Limited alcohol, knowing it would impair his coping strategies. He stayed for 3 hours, not the whole event, but enough to celebrate his friend's important day. Left before complete depletion. Went home, took a hot shower, sat in silence for 30 minutes, and felt proud. Not because he'd conquered his sensitivity, but because he'd worked with it skillfully, managed his energy, honored his limits while still showing up for someone he cared about. The next morning, he sent his friend a text. "Beautiful wedding. So happy for you both. Had to leave a bit early, but that's just how my brain works with big crowds. Hope you understand." Response came 5 minutes later. "Totally understand. Just glad you were there. Thanks for coming. No judgment." No, you should have stayed longer. Just acceptance. Michael realized that most of the pressure he'd felt to be different came from inside his own head. The world was more accommodating than he'd feared once he stopped being at war with himself. Act 3. The Gift of Sensitivity. 7 minutes, 1 year after starting therapy, Michael was sitting in Dr. Kim's office for what would be one of their final regular sessions. He'd made remarkable progress, not by changing who he was, but by understanding and working with his neurological wiring. "I want to tell you something that might sound strange," Dr. Kim said. "I don't view your sensitivity as a disorder that needed fixing. I view it as a trait with both challenges and advantages. And I think you're ready to hear about the advantages." Michael leaned forward, curious. Dr. Kim explained that the same neural architecture that made Michael vulnerable to overstimulation also gave him significant strengths. His heightened sensory processing meant he noticed details others missed. In his marketing work, this translated to catching errors in campaigns before launch, noticing subtle shifts in client mood during presentations, and identifying market trends earlier than colleagues. His deep processing style meant he thought through problems more thoroughly. He considered angles and implications that quicker-thinking colleagues overlooked. His best strategic work came from this depth. His emotional sensitivity, which he'd viewed as weakness, actually gave him superior empathy. He could read people's emotional states accurately, respond to unspoken needs, and build genuine rapport with clients who felt truly heard. Research supports this. A 2020 meta-analysis published in Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews found that individuals with high sensory processing sensitivity showed enhanced performance on tasks requiring attention to detail, pattern recognition, and emotional nuance. They also showed higher levels of creativity. Because they processed information more deeply, they made novel connections between concepts, saw possibilities others missed, thought in more complex, multidimensional ways. The challenge was that modern culture values speed over depth, breadth over focus, constant action over thoughtful reflection. Michael's brain was built for a different kind of excellence, and once he stopped trying to force himself into the extrovert ideal, his natural strengths could emerge. "Think about it," Dr. Kim said. "Would you rather live in a world where everyone processes everything at surface level, where nobody notices subtle beauty, deep meaning, emotional complexity? Your sensitivity isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. Different, not defective." Michael had never thought about it that way. He'd spent so long viewing his crowd intolerance, his need for solitude, his sensory sensitivity as problems to overcome. But what if they were just the trade-offs for cognitive strengths he'd taken for granted? Dr. Kim introduced him to research by Dr. Elaine Aron about environmental sensitivity. Some people are like dandelions. They can grow almost anywhere, thrive in varied conditions relatively unaffected by context. Others are like orchids. They wilt in harsh environments but flourish spectacularly in the right conditions. Michael was an orchid. Put him in constant crowds, noise, and chaos, and he withered. but put him in calm, controlled environments with meaningful work and genuine connections. And he bloomed. The goal wasn't to turn orchids into dandelions. It was to help orchids find and create the environments where they could thrive. Michael started seeking out other people who understood this. He found online communities of highly sensitive people, introverts, and individuals who struggled with overstimulation. For the first time, he didn't feel alone. One woman in the group described how she built her entire career around her sensitivity. She was a night shift editor working from home, rarely interacting with more than 3 people at once. To extroverts, her life might seem isolated. To her, it was perfect. She was productive, creative, and genuinely happy. Another person described how they'd negotiated a 4-day work week, using the 5th day for complete restoration. Their employer agreed because their output on those 4 days exceeded what they produced on a typical 5-day schedule when constantly depleted. Michael realized there wasn't one right way to live. The cultural narrative of constant socialization, packed schedules, and endless networking wasn't universal truth. It was just one approach that worked for one type of nervous system. He started making bigger life changes, turned down a promotion that would have required constant travel and client entertaining, accepted a different role with more strategic work and less face time, took a slight pay cut but gained massive quality of life improvement, started dating someone he met through a quiet book club instead of loud bars. Their first dates were walks in botanical gardens, used bookstores, cooking dinner at home. Both of them happily introverted, both understanding the need for separate space even within partnership. For the first time in his adult life, Michael wasn't exhausted, wasn't forcing himself through each week, wasn't white-knuckling his way through existence. 18 months after his first therapy session, Michael was asked to speak on a panel about workplace neurodiversity at an HR conference. The irony wasn't lost on him. Public speaking at a conference, something that would have terrified him before. But this time, he prepared in ways that worked for his brain, arrived the day before to acclimate to the venue when it was empty, requested a smaller breakout room instead of main stage, limited the panel to 4 people instead of 8, scheduled it for morning when he had full energy, not afternoon when depleted. His presentation focused on how organizations could better support neurological diversity, how 20% of your workforce might be struggling silently with open offices, constant collaboration, and packed social calendars, how small accommodations, quiet rooms, flexible schedules, remote work options could unlock massive potential in people whose brains work differently. The response was overwhelming. After the panel, dozens of people approached him privately. "That's me. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for putting words to what I've felt my whole life." Michael realized that by accepting and advocating for himself, he'd given others permission to do the same. Today, Michael is 35. He lives in a quiet neighborhood with his partner and their cat, works mostly from home, with strategic in-office days for meetings that genuinely benefit from FaceTime, has a small circle of close friends instead of a large social network, spends weekends hiking, reading, and attending small gatherings rather than parties. To some, his life might seem limited, but to Michael, it feels like freedom. "I used to think something was wrong with me," he told me in our final interview. "Now I understand that different brains need different environments. Mine needs quiet, needs space, needs depth over breadth. And that's not only okay, it's valuable. The world needs people who think deeply, who notice details, who process complexity. We can't all be high-energy extroverts bouncing from one social situation to the next. Someone has to be the person who actually thinks things through." He paused, smiled. "Turns out I'm wired to be that person. And I'm done apologizing for it. The human brain is the most complex structure in the known universe. 100 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others, creating patterns of electrical activity that generate consciousness, personality, experience. No 2 brains are identical. Some are wired for speed, others for depth. Some crave stimulation, others need peace. Some thrive in crowds, others flourish in solitude. None of these variations are superior or inferior. They're just different strategies the brain uses to navigate reality. If you're someone who hates crowded places, who feels drained by too much socializing, who needs quiet to think and space to breathe, your brain isn't broken. It's specialized, optimized for deep processing, careful analysis, and meaningful connection rather than superficial breadth. The challenge is living in a world that often doesn't understand or accommodate that optimization. But understanding the science, the neurology of sensitivity, the reality of different nervous systems, the legitimacy of your experience is the first step. From understanding comes acceptance. From acceptance comes strategy. From strategy comes the ability to build a life that works with your brain instead of against it. You don't need to change who you are. You need to understand who you are, honor what your nervous system needs, and give yourself permission to design your life accordingly. The crowd doesn't have to win. You just have to stop fighting yourself and start working with the remarkable, sensitive, deeply processing brain you have. It's not a limitation. It's a different kind of strength, and the world needs what you bring to it. And that's the end of our experience. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. It's very important for us to know the truth. Be honest in the comments, leaving creative suggestions so we can improve the quality of our content more and more. Comment where you're from. Check out the video on the screen. I'm sure you'll like it. See you in a few seconds. We are Applied Psychology, and this is our contribution. Subscribe.